Hey, welcome to Kensington Orion live stream. We're so glad you're joining us today. My name is Charlotte Kelly, and just want to welcome you to the stream and tell you about a few things that are coming up. First of all, baptisms. Next Saturday, we found a safe off-site location that we have a pool to use to do baptisms. So if you're interested in that, if you want to learn more, go to kensingtonchurch.org/baptisms. We can answer any questions that you have, but we do have registration closing tomorrow. So if you're thinking about baptism for yourself or someone else, go to the website today. Also, want to make sure you know that this is a great time to join a group and connect at Kensington. We're launching all of our winter groups the next couple of weeks, and all of the information about groups is at kensingtonchurch.org/groups. You can find all of our open groups listed there, and also you'll see an invitation for today and next Sunday to jump on a Zoom call with all of the discipleship directors after the services and just talk. What are the groups that are available? What might be a good fit for me? What might be my first or next step? We want to make sure that you find the next step into community and connection for growth here at Kensington. And now is the time to do it because it's really great to get in on those when they're starting up. So I hope you find a place to connect this winter. But right now, we're going to get started on week 3 in our series, The Last Arrow, and we're going to be hearing from Craig McGlasson. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, what's going on, Kensington? If you've never been here before, my name is Matthias. I'm one of the worship pastors. Let's go ahead and stand as we worship Jesus this morning. When we sing, you make the darkness. You make the darkness run and hide. You bring the broken back to life. Only you can. Only you can. You set me free from every chain. You fill my heart with songs of praise. Only you can. Only you can. Jesus, you're the only reason that I'm even breathing. I am wide awake. My heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to your rhythm, to your rhythm. Jesus, you're the only reason that I'm even breathing. I am wide awake. You move me, your freedom is consuming. I feel it rushing through me. I'll never be the same. Oh, my heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to your rhythm, to your rhythm. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Oh, every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. Like I said before, my name is Matthias, and if you've never been here before, welcome. Go ahead and have a seat and take a look at this video.
Hey Kensington, welcome to church. I'm Andrea Gibbs, the internship director here with my friend Nat Bergeron. She's an intern with guest services at Clinton Township.
What's up, Kensington? So happy to be with you all, watching online and in person. We're already in the third week in the last Arrow series, and we are praying that God will speak directly to your hearts today.
Absolutely. Today is all about that tendency to allow our past successes or shame define or limit our future.
Oh yes, we've all been there. But God calls us to follow him in a new future, regardless of our past.
Hey, speaking of a new future, you think we have any future interns watching today, Nat?
Oh, absolutely. I remember just a few short months ago when I was considering the internship program, and my friend Faith told me about how surrendering to God and his nudge completely transformed her life in 10 months.
I love that. That's how it all starts. Responding on that nudge and stepping into the next adventure of education, equipment, and empowerment. That's what happens in our Total Immersion 10-month internship. Both part-time and full-time internships offer leadership development, a hands-on approach to day-to-day operations, classroom instruction, and mentorship from staff. Natalie, other than the wonderful internship director that you get to work with, what's been the most valuable part of this experience for you so far?
Yeah, I would say the most valuable thing is how the Lord has really taken my passions for reaching our community and showed me creative and unique ways to actually live out those dreams and my passions.
Our program is ideal for young adults like Nat, career changers, and those preparing for ministry. Applications just opened up, so you can read more and apply today at kensingtonchurch.org/interns.
And if the internship program isn't for you, we have plenty of other opportunities for you to jump into community here at Kensington.
Courses and groups with both virtual and in-person offerings kick off this month. Explore your faith in Alpha, learn how to manage your money through Financial Peace University, get curious about the Bible and Bible basics, or strengthen your marriage in the marriage course.
The best part about these groups is meeting new people and finding a community of people who are on the same faith journey.
We truly believe that change happens in community. You can join a small group that meets virtually or in person. Just head to the website and filter through the options available. There's a group for everyone. Head to kensingtonchurch.org/groups to learn more.
All right, Andrea, I think it's time to get back to the rest of service. Today we're looking back at the life and legacy of a courageous hero who inspired millions of people to right a historical wrong.
Good morning, Orion. You guys are sleepyheads today. So I told first service, I've been making an observation the last couple weeks. I wanted to share it with you guys as well. First service, for some reason, seems to sit way back. Like, I don't even think nobody even sits in this row. And then that row, there's like one person in that row. So I made a conclusion. They're the bad kids, right? Because that's what you did in school, right? You sat all the way in the back, which means, don't laugh, y'all were the teacher's pets. So I'm getting to understand the dynamic of my two rooms today. It's good. Something really quick I just want to throw out and get out of the way. We know that right now we're in the middle of still a crazy time and a crazy season, and we're seeing some really good gains with this pandemic and how we're overcoming it, and the vaccine being rolled out, and some of what our numbers look like are more positive. We're seeing some things starting to loosen up and open up. So can I just make an encouragement to all of us as we keep coming in right now? We want to keep that trajectory going. Yes? would you guys just help me with the mask thing? If we can continue to just honor the mask thing that we're trying to do right now. I know that we've all got different opinions on it. I'd even be willing to share more with you and talk more off the stage if you want to talk more about it. I get that. I get we've all got opinions on it. We're trying honestly to figure out what the best thing is, what the best way is to love people right now in the middle of a crazy season with so many different opinions. So if you just keep helping us out with that while we're here, keeping the masks on, super appreciate it, super understand it's a weird time, but really value that. So here's what I also want to say this morning. We created a moment that we're going to go into right now in a video that is, well, hopefully you all are aware that this weekend is leading us into Monday, which is a celebration of Martin Luther King Day. And we created a video that we're going to show that we just talked about there in our greeting that we're going to move into. But I really felt like before we just move into it, I want to share a couple of thoughts and be a little bit vulnerable with you for a minute about where I feel I'm personally at in the middle of such a crazy time that we live. I don't know that 5 years ago, maybe even more recent than that I would have thought twice before moments in the past where I have set up moments like this and videos like this and just gone right into it. This is a different year. And I think for me, that personally, it creates a little bit of tension inside of me in this moment that I just want to be honest with you about before we go into the video that's going to honor MLK. And for me, the tension is that we have taken a conversation that is biblical and we've made it political and polarizing. We've taken a man who loved Jesus, passionately served his church, his community, his nation, to the end of a biblical picture of community, and we have oftentimes even lumped him into what is polarizing. And I just think it's such a shame. This is a biblical picture. When you read Revelation chapter 7, everything that we're about as a community of faith is moving to this end that Revelation paints a picture of, that every nation, every tongue, every tribe is gathered around the throne of Jesus to the glory of Jesus. That's a biblical picture. That's what Jesus' picture is. That's what his community is supposed to be. And we've taken what is supposed to be the heart of Jesus and warped it into this conversation that can be so difficult to have and polarizing to have, that there's even a temptation maybe for some of us to think right now particularly, oh, of course we're gonna honor MLK on MLK weekend in the middle of the craziness that we're in. And I just wanna say, I hope that we can breathe deep the scriptures that lead us to the picture that is what Jesus died for, which is his community of people, all of us, nation, tongue, tribe, around the throne of Jesus, loving one another and denouncing anything against that love. And so we want to take a minute and celebrate this man who loved Jesus, who served his church, who lived for a picture that was biblical and Jesus, and who died for it. And I pray that as we do, that something maybe in us resonates differently as it is in me than it did just years ago. That this is part of what it means to live to the glory of Jesus, is to live to the community that Jesus died for. Here it is.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in.
When you come to the point that you look in the face of every man and see deep down within him what religion calls the image of God, you begin to love him in spite of. No matter what he does, you see God's image there. have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with.
I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
I can say in all honesty, man, I really wish that we still had his present voice in our world today. So I called my dad this morning. It's funny, just this morning, I knew we were going to have that moment and show that, but it didn't dawn on me until this morning. We were in here for rehearsal, and I thought, my dad lived through that. I didn't live through that. I've never actually asked him about certain key moments in history that he's lived through. And so I called him just this morning, a couple hours ago. I was like, hey, Dad, totally random moment, totally random question. Do you remember that day when Martin Luther King was shot? And what do you remember about it? And so my dad, some of you don't know this, I've shared it a few times. My dad is blind. He's been blind since birth. His best friend is also blind. His best friend is a black guy named Tony, who's just like, I've never known our life without Tony. He's like older brother, oldest brother in our family. And so my dad tells the story that the day that happened, he said, I remember the very first thing that snapped into me that I thought is, I got to get a hold of Tony. And I didn't know this until my dad said it on the phone, or if I did, I've forgotten it over time. Apparently there was a day and age where when you'd pick up the phone, it would take several minutes to get a ringtone. That's weird. Anyways, so my dad said at first he's like waiting for a ringtone, and then he finally got the ringtone, and he said for multiple times over, the line just kept getting disconnected. and just this internal angst that he felt. That was the first thing he went to, this angst and almost panic, like, I got to get a hold of Tony. Where's Tony? What's going on with Tony? How's Tony feeling? He said that his next thought kind of grew more over the next couple of days, and it was just as all the fear about what was going to happen in Detroit as a result, because you remember this was 68, 67 was a riot, so everybody's like, are we going to go back to that? Is it going to feel like that again? Is it going to be even worse than that? And so there was this pullback that he remembers feeling with his family, like, don't go to Detroit. Detroit's going to be bad. And even though he had family in Detroit, and they didn't want to like go anymore, and so it just like this complex feeling of love for his friend, fear that started to overtake him. And even as he described it on the phone, I thought, dang it, man, that sounds so much, in many ways, like right where we're at even today. And I love that as my dad just kind of recounted his story, it was what he had gone through and lived through, and that his heart was, first and foremost, my friend. And I'd love, one day maybe you'll get to meet him and Tony and even just hear their story. It's such a cool and powerful story of learning to love somebody else and never see them. Is just incredible. But there's this reality of their hearts being drawn to each other in this very dark, broken moment in our history. And I loved as he just shared that, just being able to relay that to me and what that means for us as we move through such a divided and, I think, difficult time in our own history right now. I pray that we as the church, especially maybe today as we go through what we're going to talk about today, would lean in a little bit heavier to what God is asking us to do and to be as his hands and his feet, as his people and his voice in this world right now. Today, the topic and the title of the message is Choosing Your Future. And possibly it aligns no better than it does with this being the celebration weekend of MLK, and a man who lived and ultimately, obviously we know, died for the future that he was fighting for and choosing. So I hope that for you, if you've been a part of the series at all in the last couple of weeks, that it has been food to your soul. It seems like for many of us it has, and I can tell you in all honesty, it has been to me, and I'm not just saying that. Like you, for me, even as a pastor, as a preacher, there are times that there are certain series we do that just resonate deeper than others. This is one of them. This is one of those series that's just challenging things in me that I think really need to get challenged. Even this morning, driving here with my son on the way in, like he and I were having conversations just today about ways that some of what we're talking about are really stirring things inside of us. So this is having a good impact on me. I pray it is on you as well. The series that we're basing this off of is by the same title, The Last Arrow, written by a man named Erwin McManus. And if you've not had a chance to pick up that book, I would just encourage you to. We're not doing an exact one-for-one with the book, so it will feel like added material, it'll feel like an addition, and hopefully will be a benefit to you to go through the book as well. I want to point out the subtitle to the book, though, because I think the subtitle to the book is as much an explanation of this series as it is to the book that McManus wrote. On your screen, this is it. The subtitle is just Save Nothing for the Next Life. Save nothing for the next life. We said on week one that one of the surest ways to sabotage your own life is to only live for this life. To live with this set of blinders on that only goes after what this world offers and what this world provides, and miss that we are eternal beings to live for eternal purposes. To ultimately go through life with what we said on week one is a sense of like waking slumber. The Apostle Paul writes about this in the book of Ephesians when he calls us to be people who wake up and make the most of every opportunity. And he says, why? Because the days are evil. And if he says the days are evil, so wake up, it's almost as if to indicate that there is a certain ability every day carries that lulls us, like rocks us into a sleep, that would have us go through life still living, still awake, and yet sleeping to the realities of God, to the purposes we were made for, and to the relationships that we were made for. And so Paul says, and here's the intent of the whole series behind it, Paul says, make the most of every opportunity, but we've got to wake up first. And when you think of making the most of every opportunity, I've been thinking a lot like we don't get to the end of our lives and regret some of the things that we live our lives pursuing. Right? Like most of us, when we get to the end of our lives, we're not going to regret that we didn't work a little longer. Like, I should have gone into the office more, right? Nobody's going to get to the end and their regret is that their house wasn't a few square feet bigger or their boat wasn't a few feet longer. When we get to the end, the regrets that will consume us will be in one of two categories: relational and impact. Usually by the time we get to the end, what consumes us and what regrets we find ourselves having relationally are maybe the relationships we didn't form, the ones we didn't restore, maybe the ones that we didn't value the way they deserved to be valued. Like we don't get to the end and find ourselves haunted by, did I climb the ladder high enough? We find ourselves getting the end wondering, did my life matter? Impact. Like, did it matter that I was here? And so that's why we said on week 1, like, the call for us as a church, especially this year, is to wake up to the purposes that God has for us. And then last week we said it is to also wake up to the promises that God has for us. But here's what I'm so excited about today. And today is so simple. Like, some of you are even gonna go, I got out of bed and come to church for this. Like, it's so simple. But here's the reality. Much of what we find in this book is simple. Not easy, but simple. Today is gonna be one of those moments where the whole idea is gonna be so simple, and yet some of us are missing it. And here's what it simply is. Regardless of what God has in store for your future, the plans he has, the relationships he has, you will never experience them if you don't choose them. That's it. You have to choose them intentionally. God's plans, no matter how much he longs for them to be your life and your experience, will not just automatically happen. That's one of the reasons why we've had this prayer that I've been asking you to pray all series long. Find space and place each day to just offer this up to God as a way to ask him, align my heart with yours so that I'll know your purposes for me. I'll know the relationships you're leading me to. And so I don't know if you've been doing that. I hope you have been, but I want to give you a chance like we have been doing the last couple of weeks. We're going to put it on the screen, and I'm just going to ask you, like, if this is your desire, like you're going, yes, I agree to that. I'm going to ask you to just stand with me, and we're going to say this out loud together. And some of you, I know you're going, I don't know that this is my desire. I don't even know that there's a God. I'm trying to figure all that out. I would just say, we made this place for you. And we're so glad that you're here, and feel no uncomfortableness with just sitting or not saying this. But many of us in this room, we have journeyed the journey to say, Jesus, I want to know your heart, and I want it to be my heart. So if that's you, would you just do this? Would you stand with me for a minute? And we're just going to say this out loud by way of a prayer and a request to God together. So here we go. Ready? Jesus, cultivate my heart to care about the things you care about and to let go of the things that you don't. If you'll stay standing, I just want to pray for us for a minute. Father, I just come before you, you who all of heaven and earth derive its name from, and I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful that you are aware of every name in this room, watching online. You're aware not just of our names, but our joys, our sorrows, our dreams, our past, everything that makes us us. You are so intimately aware of all of it. And so you who are the God that knows us by name, who knows everything about us, would you speak into us today? God, would you just give us a chance to really understand your scriptures and what they mean for us this morning? Would you give us the opportunity to break out of, for some of us, what might just be the go through the motions of church today, and instead have a genuine, deep encounter with you, where you rattle something alive in our hearts that maybe wasn't there when we walked in or when we tuned in. Jesus, you are so good. You are so good to speak. You are so good to love us. You are so near and present. And so would we be aware of that presence this morning? In your name, amen. So before we go any further, I just want to take a second, and we are going to receive up our offering today. And as I say often, and I will say so many times, that at some point you will recite it in your head before I say it out loud. When we have these moments, it's not about money. It is about mission. And I love to say this because sometimes we get this idea that these moments where we take up giving, it's, well, we got bills to pay and we got buildings. I think I can sincerely say that we believe here at Kensington that if we had to sell the stuff to continue the mission and get rid of it all, we would. It's about the mission. It's not about the stuff. It's not about money. It's about mission. And so even yesterday, my wife and I were having conversations. We went shopping. We were at Costco, which, by the way, that should be an Olympic sport. Costco on a Saturday? What the heck? Anyways, we were at Costco yesterday. I think we got a bronze. And we're even, as of yesterday, having conversations about this next year and some of the places that we want to make investment for kingdom purposes. So I just continue to want to say thank you. And just remember, it's not about money. It is about mission. So if you're just joining us for the first time physically, or you're brand new here, just know we don't pass anything right now, probably for obvious reasons with COVID. However, all the ways on the screen are simple and easy to give. And we put some buckets in the back for you to give that like to do it with physical stuff. So again, thank you. Mission, not money. So coming into this morning, and I'm curious if you would agree to the same. Have you ever noticed when we're thinking about living for the most and stepping into the future God has for us, making the most of every opportunity, have you ever noticed that there's an awful lot of people that long before they get to their end, like it's one thing to say regrets at the end of your life, but have you noticed that there's an awful lot of people long before they get there that are already in the middle of living their life with regret? a sense of missed opportunity, a sense of emptiness that they're not quite fulfilling something meaningful. I was talking to somebody recently about that, and they're like, well, yeah, it's all the undriven people that don't produce anything in life. I'm like, that seems a little bit easy to explain, because that's not been my experience. It's also been very high-performing, high-achieving people that I know that would still say, even in the midst of their life, long before hopefully the end, that they still have this sense of regret, of missed moments and missed opportunities, this sense of, am I really doing what I'm here to do? And even in the church, like we don't get a scapegoat just because, well, we love Jesus and we're in spiritual work here. We don't get a scapegoat. I see that among us so often as well. Like there's so many people I know that are following Jesus, and yet they would say of Jesus' promises to give us abundant life, full life, they would say, man, those promises just seem to elude me. That's why it's so important this morning that we talk about the principle that it is imperative that if we are to experience what God has for us, we have to choose it. Because all of God's plans that he has for us, no matter how much he longs for us to step into them, he will not force them upon us, and they will not just automatically happen. Like, I don't know if you ever just think about some of the things that automatically happen in life, but probably looking at some of what your body does is a great example. Like for me, a couple years ago, I started to develop this weird heart arrhythmia. Like you're never really aware of your heartbeat. Like right now, only because I'm mentioning it, will you maybe pay attention? But otherwise, 30 seconds ago, I don't think anybody listening was paying attention to their heartbeat. But a couple years ago, I had this weird arrhythmia, and like all of a sudden, I'm like paying attention constantly. Because it was like, some days it was just playing the drums to its own beats, like da 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 da. Then it would stop, and I'd go, what? Bum, 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 bum. And it was like fast, and it'd be slow, and then it'd be like a weird rhythm. And so there's this one day, my family, we're all at the movie theater watching, I think it was one of the Star Wars shows. Is that right? She's like, I don't know. Why are you putting me out in church? You're embarrassing me, Dad. So we're watching Star Wars, I think. And like all of a sudden my heart was just like totally out of beat, like, and I'm paying complete attention to it. And I got so caught up in it that I actually started to try to control it. I was gonna put it back in rhythm. So I started breathing weird. I was like, and I'm like trying to like tightening the muscles on my chest. And I don't know if it was that or just getting stressed out that like all of a sudden it just, I swear, it stopped like for a second and then it went boom, and I lost my breath. You're like, that's not funny. I don't know, it was funny, maybe, I don't know. But I couldn't breathe, and I was like, spacey. I turned to my wife, I'm like, something's wrong. So I ended up in the hospital, and then monitors I had to wear for like weeks, trying to figure out. So thankfully it was like a benign just arrhythmia that I have, and it messes with me every now and then. But it was totally weird to suddenly become conscious of something that my body just unconsciously does that I never have to think about. Or breathing. Like, could you imagine if we had to think about breathing? Like, we had to make conscious choices about taking in every breath and taking out. Like, conversations would be like, how are you? I'm good too. Like, it would just be so odd if you had to think about every breath that you had to take. Or eating. Like, you usually don't have to tell your body you're hungry. Your body tells you you're hungry, and then you have to eat. And, like, it's just this cycle. Like, does anybody ever get tired of eating, just the process of eating? No, there's the American dilemma right there. Like, we don't, right? And so for me, I'm a diabetic, and so eating has to be kind of regimented. And so I make sure I've got enough protein, and then I take my medicine, and no, that's too many carbs. And so eating, honestly, it becomes a chore for me. And I have to think about it so much, and sometimes I'm just like, I eat a meal, and I'm like, this is so horrible. I have to do this again in a few hours. I just don't want to even think about it. Or my wife, she tells me all the time what she hates is thinking about what to feed me all the time. So it's just like there's so many things that your body automatically, unconsciously does that if your body didn't do, what? Easy question, what? Thank you, you would die, humor me. Yes, you would die. I think sometimes we have this mentality that the future is a lot like the unconscious decisions of our body. It just happens. It just happens, whether bad or good. If it's bad, I'm just a victim of it. If it's good, it just happened. And especially in the church world, it's like, well, that's God's blessing over my life. That's just how I explain it. It just happened. And I think particularly as Christians, we can have the weirdest relationship with the future sometimes. Because what we tend to think is that, God just does what he wants to do and I have no say in it. And so if he wants it to happen, it's going to happen. So my job is to just sit here with open hands and wait for him to drop the future into my lap. But the problem is that's not how it works. And the bigger problem is that because so many of us are sitting back with our hands open, just kind of waiting for God to drop the future in our lap, we are missing the future he has for us for one simple reason. We're not intentionally choosing to step into the future he has for us. So my wife and I, Nicole, have been, this next fall, we will be married for 25 years. And I can still remember, I know it's crazy, I don't feel like it should be 25 years, but I can still remember the time I asked her to marry me. I got so proud of the whole thing. So I remember I had gone and I had picked out the ring on my own. Like I did all that hard work. I looked at a few, got some opinions, ended up making the final decision on which one to get. I went to her work where she worked at the time to make sure she wasn't working that day, and she was. So I asked her boss, I'm like, hey, here's the deal. This is the day I'm gonna ask her to marry me. Can you keep her on the schedule so she thinks she's on the schedule, but actually take her off the schedule? Because I wanna have this moment where I'm like, I want you to marry me. And then she's gonna go, yes. And then I'm gonna say, here's where we're going for dinner. And she's gonna go, crap, I have to work. And then I'm gonna go, booyah, I'm awesome. I got you off work. So he was like, yeah, that's totally cool. I'll do that. I was like, yes. So I got that all set up. Then I got 24 roses. So we were at a Christian college and they do this like thing every week where you get together for chapel. And so I went to the dean of the students and I said, hey, I've got this idea. So every time we would have chapel, they would have a guest speaker come in, sometimes local, sometimes national. And I said, can you invite me in as the guest speaker? I said, and like set it up. Like, here's what I want you to do to set it up. And then I'm gonna come out and in front of everybody, I'm gonna propose to Nicole. It's a small community college, so a Christian college, so kind of everybody knew everybody a little bit. And he's like, oh, that would be so awesome. I was like, yeah, I know, it's so awesome. So is it okay? He's like, oh, it's totally okay. So the day comes, and I remember coming out in the back, and I'm hiding behind the curtain. I've got the 12 roses. I've got the ring. I'm all ready. And then he makes this awesome setup, and I come walking out, and everybody's like, oh, like they knew it was going to happen. I come walking up to her. I get down on my knee. I recite this whole speech that I had made up for her, and I love you so much. You're my best friend, all that kind of cheesy stuff, and I'm going to die with you, blah, blah. And then I have this moment where I go, will you marry me? And I freaked out because I started thinking in my head, did she really give me enough indication up to this point that she's gonna say yes? Because I got a lot of people watching me right now. And she paused. She was like emotional. My wife is like just such a tender heart. She gets emotional in the moment. She just stares at me. I'm like, I don't need your tears. I need your yes. Like, say something. So conclusion is, she chose wisely. She stepped into the right future. Maybe. Here's my question for you. Are you choosing wisely? Because every single day, we're faced with, I believe Erwin McManus actually says this in this book or another book, somewhere between 30 to 50,000 choices that we make in any given day. You're faced with an awful lot of choices every day, and I would bet that an overwhelming majority of them will impact the future you do or do not step into. Are we choosing wisely? I want to spend the rest of our time in a book that's one of my favorite stories, and honestly, one of my favorite people. His name is Peter. The story is out of John chapter 21. I'm gonna read one more verse before we get there, but for those of you that like to follow along, you can get there ahead of me. So John 21. Peter is, in many regards, for me personally, he's one of the easiest people in the Bible to identify with. When I read Peter's story, if you're familiar with it at all, you'll know some of this stuff, but Peter was just such a hothead. He's a go-getter. He went and got it wrong as much as he got it right. I would say this about Peter. If you and I were putting together a list of the 12 most likely people to walk this earth beside Jesus, Peter would not have probably made our list. Like, he was volatile, hot-headed, temperamental. I wouldn't doubt that he had a foul mouth that matched his foul temper. Peter was a guy who, in the scriptures, we have more recorded moments of him arguing with Jesus than any of the other disciples. Like, how do you argue with God? Like, if God says it, you're just like, okay. He's like arguing with him face to face. There's even more than one reference in the Bible to moments with Peter that we get to see that he had a certain struggle in his own heart with racism. Like, this is Peter. And yet, on the other hand, Peter is a guy in the Bible that, as you read his story, gave up everything to follow Jesus. Everything. In a sense, his heritage, because he walked away from a job that his dad had taught him, whose dad had taught him, gave up his stuff and possessions, gave up his reputation. He gave up everything to follow after Jesus. It was Peter who wrote 2 books of the Bible eventually. It was Peter who even became at one point seen among all the other disciples as a sort of spokesman for them and their leader. Like, it was Peter that did so much on the other hand. Like, this is a guy who went from fisherman to follower to disciple to martyr. And throughout the course of his journey, as you study Peter, his life is marked by these significant moments, listen, of intentionally choosing the future that Jesus was inviting him into when he said, follow me, Peter, follow me. Interesting thing about the invitation to follow me is the destination is unclear, but the leader is. And so Jesus would make this invitation to Peter at the onset of the relationship, follow me, and Peter did. His life was marked by very intentional moments to choose the future that Jesus had for him. But there is this one moment where Peter chose differently. And the choice that he made actually began to send him into a very different future. And ironically, that future was actually his past. Before we read that moment, I want you to see, this is Peter, the bravado Peter, the bang his chest, passionate Peter. Here's the opposite from where he ends up. So in chapter 26 of Matthew, I think verse 35 will be on your screen, but I want to read verse 33 as well. Jesus is with his disciples and having a conversation, and Peter pipes in and says, verse 33, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. So you got to see Peter. He's just making these bold statements. Probably the boldest statement that Peter ever makes to Jesus is right here, verse 35. And Peter even declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. This is so funny. Again, this is more than just like a peek into Peter because of the declaration he makes to Jesus, but how he makes it. Like, he's standing there in the midst of the other disciples, and he starts off, he's like, even if all those guys bail on you, I'm not doing it. Like, if I'm the other guys, I'm like, Pete, what the heck, man? Which is why at the end, I think they're all like, hey, we would too. We would die too. But here's Peter, like he's brash, he's a little arrogant, super passionate, ready to charge in. And in this moment, he makes the boldest declaration to Jesus that he could. I will never abandon you. Matter of fact, Jesus, before I would ever abandon you, I would die with you. And if you know Peter's story and you know Jesus' story, that's actually not what happened. As a matter of fact, in Jesus' most desperate hour, it ends up becoming his loneliest hour. When he's arrested in the garden that would lead to his trial and ultimately his execution, all of the disciples abandon him, including Peter. But Peter even goes a step beyond that. Because Peter was curious enough to want to follow the crowd that was assembling to watch the trial and ultimately the execution. And in that crowd, he gets recognized 3 different times. People go, yeah, you're one of his followers, right? And 3 different times. He's like, nope, I do not even know that guy. All the way up to the 3rd time when somebody accuses him, he gets frustrated and he snaps back. He's like, I don't know the guy. So this is Peter, right? Disciple, follower. I'll die for you. And in the moment of Jesus' most desperate hour, he's like, I actually don't even know the guy. But here's the thing. That's not his step backwards. It's what led to it. But here's his step backwards, John 21. Verse 1 says this. After Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, it happened this way. So I'm going to read how it happened, but I just want to note, this is going to be the 3rd time that Jesus will have appeared to his disciples. I don't know if all of us are aware of this, but when Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't come back from the dead and immediately go back up to heaven. It was well over a month's time that we believe he walked this earth, interacted with people, taught, visited. So twice already, he's presented himself to his disciples. This will be the 3rd time. Here's what's interesting to note about that. There doesn't yet seem to be a reassembling of the team that's occurred. Everyone is kind of scattered and stayed scattered. And so here's what happens on that beach. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and the other 2 disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, well, we'll go with you. And so they went out and they got in the boat. And that night, they caught nothing. Early the next morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not recognize that it was Jesus. And so he called out to them, friends, haven't you caught any fish? No, they answered. So he said to them, well, throw your nets on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of such a large number of fish that they caught. So what happens next in the next couple of verses, if you were to continue to read it, is that there's a moment where John, who's in the boat, recognizes that's Jesus. Peter gets all excited, steps up in the boat, leaps out. Again, this is Peter, swims to shore, abandons everybody else. They've got to do the work. He gets into shore. Finally, they row into shore. He goes back, helps them haul in 153 fish in a net that frankly was more than that net could have held. So even that was a miraculous moment. They get the pile on the shore, and then Jesus is cooking breakfast. And so they sit down and they all eat breakfast together. And then there's a conversation we're going to look at in just a minute that Peter and Jesus end up having. But here's what's fascinating to me in this moment as I read this, is that Peter, in this moment, was choosing a very different future than Jesus had for him. And the future he was choosing was actually his past. He went back to what he knew, which is fishing. He went back to what he understood. And I think in our own lives, probably nothing more than a moment of failure, a moment of regret, will have the temptation and the tendency to have us choose the wrong future. And a lot of times in that moment, what it'll invite us to choose is the past. Something that we did, someone that we were. And in this moment, I think 3 times after a denial, what Peter has done is ran away in shame. And in that moment, what he's decided to do is to, I think, give in to the fear and the shame that he has, that then draws him back to this comfort of a past that he had. So I've been telling you all throughout this series that I'm a hunter. My go-to is a bow. So I have this 3D target in my backyard that I've been shooting at for a while now, and I can tell you I probably put hundreds of arrows into this target, never once missed, until last year. So last year, I don't know if it was just I've been shooting a lot, my arms got tired, or maybe I'm just a really bad shot this day, which that's probably what it was, but I'm at full draw, I'm looking at my target, and at some point, just before I released, I felt my muscles begin to twinge a little bit, and then before I knew it, I released, and I'm way over here. I got feet. I missed it by feet. That arrow, I'm only 25 yards away from the fence. That arrow went right through the fence my neighbor and I share, and I was certain at that point that with the velocity it was headed, it probably traveled through his yard and went through the next fence. So here's where I start to panic. The neighbor right next to me, never home, always working. Neighbor next to him, always outside. So all I'm picturing is poor Fred's got an arrow in his hip. I'm like, ah! So I panicked, and I had a moment where I honestly didn't know if I wanted to go see if everything was okay or go hide under my bed. I'm like, I don't know what to do right now. So I went to go see, I calmed down, but you know those moments your heart's like, brrr. So I'm having that moment. I look over the fence, I can't see anything, so I'm trying to gauge by the hole the trajectory of the arrow. I'm like, I can't tell, I think it looks pretty straight. It had to go through the other fence. So I go look, I can't find a hole in the other fence, so then I hop the fence into the other guy's yard. I'm looking everywhere. Long story short, I found it. What happened was it went through the first fence, and I guess when it hit the fence and it went through, the arrow snapped in half. And that turned its trajectory straight down and just buried itself right in the ground. So thankfully I found it, I took it, I got it at home, and I put everything away for weeks. Like, it was weird. I had a panic every time I thought about going and shooting in the backyard for weeks. I could not go back out there. I think this is Peter's missed target, broken arrow moment. When he says, I will die for you. It was the bullseye he was saying he was aiming for. And then Jesus dies, and he ran and hid. And I think in this moment, he allowed this security of his past, the familiarity of his past, to draw him backwards instead of the uncertainty of his future to draw him forward. I don't know what to do with what I just did. I don't know how God will respond to me. So instead of moving forward into that, I'm just going to go back to what was familiar. In the next couple of minutes, the conversation that unfolds between Jesus and Peter is honestly, I think, one of the most important, powerful, beautiful moments in all of Scripture, because it's not intended to just be a moment shared between Jesus and Peter, but between God and us in these similar situations. So they finished eating breakfast, and it says in verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, this is a really interesting question, and there's a lot of debate over what Jesus is asking here. And some people actually think that Jesus was referring to the other disciples. Like, hey, Pete, those guys, them or you, like, who loves me more, Pete? I just don't think that feels like the character and the heart of Jesus. As a matter of fact, there was a very clear moment in Scripture where the disciples were jockeying for who would be better than the other in eternity, and Jesus put that conversation down. He's like, that's not what this is about. And so it seems weird that he would actually be encouraging that kind of relationship among them right now. So I don't think when he says, do you love me more than these, it's a reference to who. I think it's a reference to what. Because remember, on this shore is not just the disciples and Jesus. They just pulled a giant pile of fish onto the shore. And that pile of fish for Peter is very representative. For Peter, that pile represents his past. It represents his identity. It represents his security. It represents a certain amount of certainty. He understands it. He knows it. He gets it. Listen, I think when Jesus was saying, Peter, do you love me more than these? This is what he meant. Sorry, I think you got a little fin on you there, sorry. I literally think this is what Jesus was referencing when he looked at Peter and said, Peter, do you love me more than these? Come on, Pete. Is this really the future you're going to choose? This is what you're going to go back to? Pete, you've got to love me more than these. Here's the reality for all of us. There's a these. And I don't know what yours is. But there will always be a these for all of us. And it'll be different for us. But there will always be a these that will whisper and tempt us to choose a different future. And sometimes that future will actually, ironically, be our past. Going back to a past you or a past habit. But it doesn't always have to be going back to something or something bad. I mean, think about Peter. Peter could have been a fisherman, and a good one. It's not a bad lifestyle. He didn't choose something wicked or broken. He just chose something that wasn't God's future for him. But he could have chosen this. He could have been a fisherman. He could have been good at it. He could have provided for his family, for his community, and lived a good, long life being a fisherman. It wasn't a bad thing, but it wasn't the future Jesus had for him. And so in this moment, Jesus says to him, like I think he says to all of us, do you love me more than these? Because these will always put you at a crossroads with the future I have for you, where you're going to have to choose my future or that future. Do you love me more than these? And here's the sobering reality. Some of us are going to live for these. And no matter what you accomplish in this life, no matter how great it even is, if it's accomplished outside of stepping into the future Jesus has for you, at the end it will be nothing more than a smelly pile of fish. Which is why Jesus asks us before we get to that point, will you love me more than these? And so Peter responds to him, and he says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And then Jesus said, well, then feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said, then take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him a third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. Because I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself. You went where you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him the same thing he initially said when he pulled him away from the boat the first time. Then Peter, follow me. Peter, follow me. I love that Jesus had a future for Peter. And that future wasn't always clear. And here's what you cannot miss. That future was not cushy. He says to him, listen, when you were younger, you made all your decisions. Went where you wanted to go, did what you wanted to do, dress how you wanted to dress. When you get to the end, guess what? That will not be the same. You will actually be led by the hand to places you do not want to go. He's not saying, Peter, I'm going to lead you into a cushy life. It's going to be comfortable and easy. He actually says, the life that I'm inviting you into, the future, if you choose this, Peter, if you step into this, it's going to get bad at one point. As a matter of fact, you will die as a result of the path you take. It will not be cushy, but Peter, it will be rewarding, fulfilling, and satisfying. And as the God of creation, it is the future I have for you. So do you love me more than these, Peter? And I love that Jesus has a future for Peter. But up to this moment, Peter hasn't chosen that to be his future. And so what Jesus does is he starts with the foundation. Do you love me? That's where it all has to begin. God is always asking for our obedience to flow out of our affection. He says, do you love me? And then Peter says, yes. He says, all right, foundation. Now let's move to future. Here's what I want you to do. Feed my sheep. And he begins to give indication as to the future he's calling him into. But in that moment, Peter is literally at a crossroads. Like he has to decide between the fish or the lambs, between his past or the future, between the life he had been creating for himself or the life that Jesus was calling him into. And I really do believe that often, daily, we find ourselves at crossroad moments of decisions, some grand and some small, that are all about us determining, are we loving this more or the future God has for us? Are we choosing the future that he has or a different future? But we've got to choose. McManus says this about the future. Tomorrow comes no matter what it is you do, but the future comes depending on what you choose. So 3 times Jesus asks, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Then do this, do this, do this. Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And there's speculation sometimes about why he asked him 3 times. The obvious would be maybe because Peter denied him 3 times. I almost wonder if it isn't also in part because Peter was the chest-pounding bravado, I'm going to die with you, big talker. But in the end, when it was needed, his big talk didn't turn into big commitment. It just stayed big talk. Really, what Peter had gotten accustomed to is big spiritual language that let him hide his big spiritual fear. And I think sometimes we do the same, where it's easy to talk a big talk. And we do it when we say things like, we're just going to trust God, he's in control, and we're just going to trust whatever he does. But then we don't join him in what he's doing. You just got to stand back and go, let him do it in my life or around my life. We're just going to let him do it. There's just this really weird idea that we've developed in Christendom that if God wants it to happen in my life, around my life, it's just going to happen. It's just going to automatically happen. And I just want to ask, who taught us that? Because we see the opposite of that in the scriptures constantly. Even with one of the stories with Jesus that we can't read this morning, but the story of the rich young ruler, some of you may know it. This guy who was wealthy and successful and religious comes to Jesus and has a spiritual conversation about the future and the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus drops some stuff on him and says, here's what you got to do. And literally leading him to a life of open-handedness and generosity and a different future. And what's so powerful about that story is what's not included in it. And what's not included in it is when this guy walks away and says no, is that Jesus doesn't run after him. Jesus literally answers his question, and the guy goes, all right, 2 futures, I'm gonna pick my own, no. And Jesus doesn't run and grab him by the shoulder and go, whoa, wait. I'll take away some of what may be too difficult. Or I'll make it easier for you. Or let me, maybe I didn't say compelling enough. Let me wrap some more visuals and illustrations into it. He says nothing. And he lets this guy choose a different future. It wasn't the one he had for him. And I can guarantee because of that, it was not one that was fullness of life. Jesus says, I have come, and I have come to give you full and abundant life. And mind you, these choices, they're not just the big grand things. Maybe they are for some of us. I'm convinced that there's some of us that there is a wrestling and a stirring that you have felt. Maybe for a long time. An angst that you have of something in this world that just needs to be different, should be better, that's not happening. And there's a part of you that's I would love to do whatever. But then you think about it and you're I don't know how to pay my bills, and it might be a relocation, and suddenly there's this fear. And you pull back a little bit. And I'm convinced that for some of us, there possibly is a moment, even in this next year, where there will be grand decisions some of you will make. That could be a relocation and a new job and an entirely new focus. Listen, that's my story. The only reason I'm standing on this stage and in this room with you and a part of the Orion community is because in the last few years, I felt Jesus say, hey, the future you're on, the path you're going on, it's not bad. I actually put you on that, but I'm changing, and here's a new future. And what are you gonna do? Where are you gonna step? The only reason I'm here is because I felt like Jesus laid a different future in front of me, and I stepped into it. And I'm certain that some of us are gonna have a similar moment, a big, completely redirecting of our lives moment. So hear this, though. In addition to that, all of us have these kinds of decisions every day. They're just a lot smaller, and so we dismiss them as being less important, less about our future. For some of us, it'll be a moment when we feel that draw maybe back to the bottle, or that draw just to have too many when we already told ourselves tonight, I'm not gonna do that again. Do you realize that that is a moment where you are choosing the future or the past? Or maybe for some of us, it will be when there is that draw to sit down at 2 a.m. in front of the computer and fulfill a desire that tomorrow you're going to regret again like you always do. It is a moment to choose which future you want. Or for some of you, maybe it's an argument with your spouse and an angst and a decision in that moment of whether or not you're going to double down on your frustration, or you're going to bury that one under resentment to pull out later, or you're going to extend grace and forgiveness and own your own junk. That is a moment of choosing the future and which future you want. And some of you might even say, listen, some of the things you just mentioned, that's not actually my past, that's my present. It doesn't have to be. And this is one of the powerful things about God, is that in the scriptures we're told that his mercies to us are new every single morning, which means for the follower of Jesus, your present is actually very short, because every morning your present can become your past. Every morning. Every decision, your present can become your past. which is why what you choose in everything is so critical and so important, is that the future Jesus has for you. Have you noticed that evil never begs for God's permission to create the future it wants? Stalin, Hitler, they didn't wait for God's permission to create the future they wanted. They just did it. And yet I see so often that men and women of Jesus stand back and just wait. And we even have a tendency to look at the brokenness, look at the angst, look at the evil around us, and get mad at God and go, God, why don't you do something? Like maybe even this year you've been doing that. Looking at things going on around the world, and just, God, why aren't you doing something? And I think God looks back at us so often, and I think he's screaming back. I did. I made you so you do something. You move into the darkness. You move into the brokenness. When Jesus said, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, that wasn't just gonna magically, automatically happen. We are the heaven initiators. We are the change agents of God. And sometimes we just sit back and we wait for change to happen in our lives and around our lives. History bears out true that changes nothing. History is full of, in the past and in the present, brokenness, poverty, depression, oppression, loneliness, despair, hate, and evil. And if we just wait for change to happen in us, wait for change to happen around us, it will never happen. We are made to be God's change agents. May we be the people who let our love for Jesus compel us into action for Jesus by choosing a different future, by choosing his future for us. By not choosing that. I just want to end where we began, with the same prayer on all of our behalf. Jesus, would you cultivate our hearts to care about the things that you care about and to let go of the things that you don't. In your name, amen.
Through waters uncharted, my soul will embark. I'll follow your voice straight into the dark. And in from the course you intend I depart. Speak to the sails of my wandering heart. When you guide, clear the skies before me, and I'll glide
have one more before we're done, but I just want to have a moment. Somebody asked me a while ago, this is a couple years ago, somebody asked me, why do you always seem so angry when you preach? I'm not angry. I just believe this. And I haven't always chosen the right future. Matter of fact, pile them up, my pile of wrong choices, huge. But the moments I've chosen right, I have tasted the goodness of God and felt the fullness of his life that satisfies like nothing else does. And I want that for you so bad. And this world is so wicked to lull us into a belief that that does what only Jesus does. But it occurred to me this last week that for some of us, as we're in a series talking about choosing your future, I wonder if all of us have actually had a moment where we've chosen Jesus. Because put the future aside for a moment. If you haven't chosen Jesus, I don't know how you choose his future. The story of the Bible is, I mean, when you really get honest, it's an insane story. Number one, that there is a God over creation, an almighty who with the breath of his lungs breathed into existence everything that is. Spoke it into existence. The stars, the planets, the beauty of sunrises, the falling crash of waves, and then after all of that, decided something was missing and we became the crown jewel of his creation. And he made you and I. And not just to make us to then abandon us, he made us to love us, to know us. God wants to be with us, wants to love us, wants to be loved by us. Like, it's crazy. And then we wrecked it. And we spent our lives doing this and pursuing this. And he said, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll clean that whole mess up by coming and becoming one of you and showing you how to do this human thing and then taking the place for every moment of mistake and brokenness. On that cross, conquering the grave, walking out of it, all for one end, to know us and relate to us and have relationship with us. That the God of creation wants to be to us like a dad. Like, that is unbelievable. And I just wonder, have you stepped into that yet? Or is this just kind of a religious motion, church thing still, and you haven't had a moment where you've gone, yeah, I want to choose Jesus for my life. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that. Because sometimes we think it takes way more than it does. We think it takes like going to church a certain amount of times, memorizing certain parts of the Bible, cleaning parts of our life up. Listen, I will tell you this, it takes more than you can ever pay, which is why he paid it. For you, it takes nothing more in this moment than acknowledging what Paul said in Romans, Jesus Christ is Lord, crucified and resurrected. I got a lot more questions than that. So do I, so do we all. But if we can acknowledge that and say, I can choose Jesus, then I want to invite you to do that right now. Whether in the room or watching online, I want to invite you to do that. And how am I going to do it? I'm going to give you a prayer to pray. There's no standard, there's no way to do this in the scriptures. But I just try to put words into heart into words, and then give you an opportunity to respond to God. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to pray a prayer, and I'm going to ask if you're in this moment going, I want to choose Jesus. Yes, I want to choose him. Then would you just pray this prayer with me? And I'm going to ask you to do this. Would you do it out loud? And I know for some of you, you're like, I don't want to be out loud and be heard. There's just this thing in Romans where it says when you confess with your mouth. And I think there is something powerful about taking what's in your heart and putting it into your words. And so I'm going to ask you, if you're choosing Jesus, put it into your words and let it echo through creation. So pray this with me. Here we go. Dear Jesus, today I choose you. Amen. And you're like, wait, that's it? Yes. There's going to be so much more that the two of you will talk about over time, but that's where it begins. Choosing Jesus. The next song we're going to sing, I think is so perfect to wrap the day up with. Because as we choose him, there are promises that have become our certainty. So you chose today, his promises are yours.
God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant and faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven you do just what you say. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast. And let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, you are never changing. Faithfulness never ending. God, from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Yeah, your history can prove there's nothing you can't do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast. My heart learned when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Come on, we sing. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Oh.
Come on, let's sing this out. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. Oh, he'll never let me down. Great is your faithfulness to in every season. Great is your faithfulness to from the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Sing, great is your faithfulness to me. Come on, you sing. Great is your from the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope in firm foundation. He'll never let me down.
on, declare that. I put my faith in, yeah, my anchor to the ground, my hope in firm foundation. He'll never let me down. Oh, I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope in firm foundation. He'll never let, oh, I put my faith, oh, my anchor to the ground, my hope in firm foundation. Oh, he'll never let me down. Oh, he'll never let me down. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Jesus, great is your faithfulness to me.
So good. I got to start getting used to when you're going to take us a little further. Otherwise, I'm going to end up here singing with you one day. I hope today felt like more food to your soul. I want to give you 3 things as you walk out the door to be conscious of that we've talked about. One is baptism's coming up. If you have not yet made that decision, and I would even say if today you made the first time decision for Jesus, that's your next step. If you've not made that decision, even if you've been walking with Jesus for years but haven't done that, this is it. This is the last weekend we'll be talking about it, and then 2 weeks from now, we'll be watching it on screen as so many have taken the step. And Orion, from what I understand, I think we have the most people leading the charge right now being baptized, which is super exciting. So we would love to have you be a part of that. You can go online to kensingtonchurch.org/baptisms to sign up. Or if you just have questions, feel free to go out to the hub or even meet me down here, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have about that. We also have opportunity for you to get involved and to plug in. So as we're talking about stepping into the future, for some of you, it's stepping into community. Maybe that means a step into here at Orion. So if you're ready to get involved, we have 2 awesome opportunities. One is our guest services team, and the other is with our K-Kids. So we would love to invite you to explore that. Again, go out to the hub. They can navigate you through the process. So you are so loved and appreciated for being here. Glad you were with us for this morning. Excited to be back with you again next week. So have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.
Bye.